The 19th century saw the rise of the modern industrialist, an explosion of immigration, inventions that would change the world, and the birth of the billionaire class. This was called the Gilded Age from 1870 to about 1900. It was named by 1920s historians after Mark Twain's 1873 novel, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. Many of the business practices of these so-called robber barons were perhaps deemed necessary to conduct a business back then, but in many cases their actions were deplorable, even by the standards of their day. One man rose above his contemporaries to use politics, force, coercion, subterfuge, and manipulation, becoming the world's first billionaire. He was one of the most corrupt men in history in increasing his wealth at the risk of the health and lives of American citizens. And he had a lot of help. That phenomenon still exists to this day. Who was John D. Rockefeller? How did he make his wealth and maintain it? What did he do that would be considered criminal acts today? How was his influence survived even through today? John Davison Rockefeller Sr. was born on July 8, 1839 in Richford, New York. He became an assistant bookkeeper at age 16 and entered into the business world and made good investments, joining in partnerships beginning at age 20. Many of his business partners were connected to the Freemasons, but there is no evidence that Rockefeller was ever a member. With his own money and family support, he engaged in the oil business, drilling in some cases, but primarily oil refining. And then he founded the Standard Oil Company in 1870 and managing the company until 1897. By 1900, Rockefeller controlled about 90% of all the petroleum production in the United States, and his research teams created the first plastics, gasoline for internal combustion engines, which brought himself and Henry Ford quite close together, as well as Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, all as business partners. The invention of the internal combustion engine created the need for gasoline, and Rockefeller controlled the entire industry in a monopoly, and the U.S. government was his largest client. As a result, Rockefeller used his influence and money to lay the groundwork for a complete takeover of the healthcare industry as well. Using his political contacts, who were essentially on his payroll for their elections, he had natural healing methods banned, doctors thrown into prisons, and hospitals and clinics threatened with being shut down if they did not follow his game plan. And here's how he did it. In 1901, he established the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now known as Rockefeller University, dedicated to advancing biomedical research, and was instrumental in pioneering various medical treatments, including vaccines, antibiotics, and synthetic drugs, which would become the cornerstones of the burgeoning pharmaceutical industry. Rockefeller spent $100 million of his own money, equal to $2.6 billion today, to hire, train, and then deploy his doctors, clinical researchers, and chemists who would perform and follow his guidelines, banning traditional treatments in favor of the new platform. In 1902, he spent another $1 million to fund the creation of the General Education Board, which was passed by Congress based upon selective and misleading data. Effectively, he lied, which then proceeded to prevent medical colleges and universities from receiving federal grants if they did not abandon the teaching of natural healing. Rockefeller was a devotee of social Darwinism. He was an open racist. He agreed with the views of Margaret Sanger. See our video on her. In 1909, Rockefeller selected Andrew Carnegie, the Irish-born steel magnate and founder of U.S. Steel, to perform a national tour of hospitals and clinics to evaluate the current methods of treating illness and disease. So Carnegie chose a former schoolteacher, Abraham Flexner, who was neither a physician nor scientist, definitely not a doctor, but actually a wealthy owner and operator of a for-profit college in Kentucky. The result was the Flexner Report of 1910, which called for a centralized system of controlling healthcare in a true socialist fashion, but also created the age of big pharmaceutical companies. You see, up until that time, most doctors practiced holistic medicine, using natural herbs and compounds to treat illness, which had been the case for many centuries around the world, and many were highly effective. But they were not as profitable for a pharmaceutical company hoping to break into the very new and potentially profitable drug industry. But why would Rockefeller go to these great lengths? Well, hold on, because the story gets insane and still rings true today. Rockefeller wanted to corner the global pharmaceutical market, but to do so, he needed allies in the business all over the world, and here's how he did that. He started the war on plant-based medications, which extended all the way into the big pharma companies condemning cannabis and cocaine, for example. Since natural-growing plants cannot be patented, the big pharma lobby even today spends billions in Congress to keep natural remedies off the market so they can make profits on chemically created treatments, many of which don't even work. Part of the misleading data was the claim that Rockefeller's doctors had eradicated hookworm in the U.S., which was touted as a major achievement using their own medical compounds. It was a lie, but it worked to get Congress on board. Rockefeller then spent $180 million more staffing these schools with like-minded sycophants who were reliant upon him for their livelihoods, replacing the previous faculties who were then blacklisted. Rockefeller created a nonprofit that donated big money to medical schools that followed Flexner's advice. This in turn benefited his own growing chemical business once the competition was removed. We saw this major conflagration during the COVID-19 pandemic when Big Pharma coerced Congress and President Joseph Biden to condemn much cheaper, safe, readily available, and proven remedies such as hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin in favor of an experimental and now proven failed vaccine that was cheap to produce but patented for profit. The Biden administration then fired and had social media outlets censor medical experts who challenged the Dr. Fauci platform and see our video on him. It was all about the dollars, healthcare and lives be damned. Rockefeller then began producing his own medicines with a petroleum base, meaning oil, which is a known carcinogen, and most of these were highly addictive. Traditional herbal treatments were then labeled as alternative, and he lobbied and bribed politicians to have them banned as unscientific quackery. Then he got the insurance companies on board to ban payments for such treatments. He did this also by taking control of the American media, with the collusion of the great newsmen of the day, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, who helped spread his propaganda as all would see a profit. He also took over the American Medical Association, where he could control what was being taught in medical schools and push his doctrine that supported his own poison pill business, eliminating natural healing from the curriculum. Doctors and professors who challenged this new orthodoxy were fired, banned from teaching and practicing medicine, and their licenses were revoked. To give context to this evil by Rockefeller, once it was proven that his own manufactured medicines were causing cancer, he founded the American Cancer Society and prevented any of that information from being disclosed, and then still prevented natural remedies from being used by the medical profession. We saw this recently with the big pharmaceutical companies giving the COVID-19 injections and hiding the downside of the massive rejections and side effects of those shots, the jab. The hypocrisy was astounding because now Rockefeller, along with J.P. Morgan and Kuhn Loeb and Company, which later became Lehman, wanted to protect their newly obtained wealth. They all worked with Nelson Aldrich to create the Federal Reserve System in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson, and see our video on him, to whom they contributed heavily to both of his campaigns. In addition, they were instrumental in establishing a federal income tax despite their previous collective positions on that subject, and the Fed declaring such a thing was communistic. Ironically, Aldrich's daughter was also married to one of Rockefeller's sons. So why the great change in their opinion? Simple. Exemptions. It should be noted that Rockefeller and his cronies, who first opposed the Fed and see our video on that subject, is very much like Bill Gates today, as most of these gigantic pharmaceutical companies and banks have since created tax-exempt foundations wherein they donate massive amounts of their corporate shares to not only avoid income taxes and capital gains taxes, but also estate taxes, and the money goes to bribe members of Congress. They supported the creation of the Fed and IRS, control of Big Pharma and healthcare, while still supporting the legislature that created laws that they were exempt from. Rockefeller was the godfather of this lethal corruption. Of interest at the time, Kuhn Loeb was run by Jacob Schiff, whose grandson married Al Gore's daughter in 1997, just to make that connection. The families so famous in politics today are connected through this criminal connection. In 1930, Salmon P. Chase became involved, and Chase Bank bought Equitable Trust Company of New York, whose largest shareholder was, you got it, John Rockefeller Jr., making Chase the largest bank in the world and Rockefeller the most powerful man in the oil and drug business. So it was a family affair. So in 1939, Rockefeller created a business partnership with the German company IG Farben, the parent company of Bayer. It should be noted that Auschwitz was the largest mass extermination factory in human history. However, few people are aware that Auschwitz was 100% subsidiary of IG Farben. Well, when it came to the Holocaust, Rockefeller's company was a willing partner. On April 14, 1941 in Ludwigshafen, Otto Armbrust, the IG Farben board member responsible for the Auschwitz project, stated to board colleagues, "Our new friendship with the SS is a blessing. We have determined all measures integrating the concentration camps to benefit our company." And who was their major benefactor? You got it, John D. Rockefeller Jr. What he was referring to was the production of a pesticide called Zyklon B, which was being used on crops and as a household insecticide, but was being phased out due to health concerns. SS doctors such as Karl Brandt and others found a very good use for it in the gas chambers, making mass murder more efficient than carbon monoxide buses and firing squads. As a result of the horrors that resulted after World War II, IG Farben was dissolved and rebranded under the companies such as General Mills, Kellogg, Nestle, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Procter & Gamble, Roche and Hecht, now Sanofi Aventis, among others. Today, IG Farben still exists as a company, but in liquidation. And the connections go even deeper where corruption is concerned, as David Rockefeller, the grandson to David Sr., was the CEO and chairman of Chase Manhattan, which later became J.P. Morgan Chase. Today, J.P. Morgan's assets are worth over $2.727 trillion. Chase had a strong presence in Hong Kong, but now the Chinese Communist Party is in charge, so that may explain a few things for a future video. This sector of the medical industrial complex employs something on the order of 1,100 highly trained federal lobbyists, more than 2 for each member of Congress. The Center for Responsive Politics estimates that the drug companies spent $280 million on Capitol Hill in 2017 alone, a 12% increase over 2016 spending. They also poured $58 million into the 2016 election, mainly supporting Democrats, but a few did support Donald Trump, hedging their bets. Today, the Rockefeller empire, in tandem with J.P. Morgan Chase, owns 50% of the big pharma industry in the U.S., and the U.S. alone accounts for over 50% of all global pharma sales in the industry. And that is the second largest manufacturer of products after the weapons industry. However, as if the corruption was not bad enough, in order to make even greater profits, Big Pharma started moving their manufacturing overseas in the 1990s using cheap and even slave labor, but still raising the cost of medications, and today, most of our more important drugs come from India and China. We need change, and change is coming.